have been Many birders have been delighted to observe evening grosbeaks, redpolls, and other winter finches. This season, colorful visitors from the north. In this program, Matthew Young, president and founder of the Finch Research Network, will talk about all things finch, from finch irruptions to winter finch forecasts to finch research projects, including projects about the distribution and ecology of different evening grosbeaks and red crossbill flight calls. Matt has been enjoying nature since a very young age. He lives in central New York almost 25 years and studied everything from birds to orchids. Matt received a BS in water resources and a minor in meteorology from SUNY Oneonta and MS in ornithology from SUNY of Syracuse in 2003. Matt did his master's research on avian diversity in restored wetlands of central New York. He was a regional editor of the Kingbird for 10 years. I love that paper. And adjunct professor in environmental studies in SUNY Cortland, and currently teaches an Intro to Birding class for Cornell University and is the board chair at the Wetland Trust. He has worked at the Cornell lab for 15 plus years doing atlas survey and audio work. Matt, welcome aboard. We're glad you're here.
Thank you, Gene. Thanks for the introduction. It's always a pleasure to do this presentation. As I was talking to Gene and Jennifer before, this presentation, I like to talk finches. Berkey and Gail know that from back in the day when I used to do actually the Montauk count and the Sagaponic count back around 2000 and 90. I think it was 99 to 2002. I did that with John Askelson. But anyway. Again, thank you for having me. This is me feeding red polls a couple of years ago in upstate when we had a much bigger eruption across the board, really, of finches than we did this year. This year was a solid eruption, wasn't a particularly huge eruption compared to a couple of years ago. Some finch species were around, some weren't as much. But I always like to give everybody a little bit of backstory. How did I end up becoming so finch focused? So let's see here. My backstory is, I finished that degree in Oneonta in water resources, hydrogeology, and meteorology. I realized I did not want to go into that as a field. The most popular job in the field at the time in '95 was something called LUST. It was leaky underground storage tanks. It was assessing old abandoned gasoline stations. For basically spillage of gasoline. So I started birding that last semester in Oneonta a little bit, and I bought a pair of binoculars. I bought a car. I went to a Grateful Dead concert, and the day after the Grateful Dead concert, I drove cross country. Early June of '95, I think that was, and I did some stopping along the way. I stopped in Chicago. I stopped in Wisconsin. I stopped in, camped in the Badlands. I camped in the Black Hills. But I landed in Yellowstone. I had a host. I took a job as a host in the Lake Yellowstone Inn. I actually grew up in the restaurant business. My father owned an Italian restaurant for 26 years in Troy, New York. And I took a job as a host. And that first day I landed in Yellowstone, I grabbed my binoculars. I went to this location here in this photo. This is Lower Falls of Yellowstone. And as I was at Lower Falls in Yellowstone, which I think the next slide here, let me back up here. Was at the Lower Falls in Yellowstone, a flock of birds flew in above me. And I remember putting my bins on them. And I knew enough that they were, opening the scales on a pine cone. It was lodgepole pine, I believe. And, they were feeding on the seeds in the lodgepole pine. And as I was watching them, the seed coats were falling down upon me. And I didn't know it at the time. It's like one of those moments that you don't realize it at that very moment. But my whole life shifted. It's amazing the power of birds. A lot of us have similar stories. It was a spark bird, but it was also just a spark moment for my life. Opened my whole world and perspective to how I thought about the world and everything. And I think, birds are an important guide for a lot of us when we pay attention to them. From there, I actually took a position. I was in Yellowstone for 3 months. I lived there 3.5 months, something like that. And then I went to this location, which was Mount Adams, which is kind of the forgotten mountain in the Cascades in Washington. I took a full position in AmeriCorps, which is like a domestic-based Peace Corps. And my world, or my trajectory, kind of continued to shift. And it was there that I really started to become kind of like, all right, I think I can do this birding ornithology thing maybe as a career. And, the interesting thing is I would go on these carnivore camera set hikes, snowshoeing in the middle of the winter. We'd have to go into these remote areas in the Kiffer-Pinchot National Forest. And we basically were looking for the presence of pine martens in Canada lynx. So we had these kind of baited areas that would take photos if they came into a camera, one of the areas. But on those snowshoe treks, I could always count on finches. It's a much more coniferous forest across the West. I always remember seeing siskins and crossbills and evening grosbeaks. And from there on, I really never looked back. Just to give everybody a little bit of insight of what I watched at that moment there at Yellowstone Falls, I'm going to play this video here.
Of the 10,000 bird species on Earth, only 5, all in the finch family, have crossed bills. The white-winged crossbill is found in the higher latitudes of North America, traveling from coast to coast in large flocks in search of white spruce trees. Females are greenish-yellow, males red, and both have 2 distinct white bars on the wings. Their unique crossed bill, with the lower mandible curving under the upper maxilla, is adapted to reach heavily protected seeds found under tough cone scales. To reach the seeds, a white-wing places the tip of the curved lower mandible against the cone while inserting the upper maxilla under the scale. Beak partially open, the bird uses the curved mandible as a lever, twisting his head as he pries up the scale. He eats the seed, discarding the husk. The curve of the mandible provides the leverage needed to force the scale up, enabling crossbills to feed on seeds that are not accessible to other species. A white-wing often twists the cone off and carries it to a perch where it holds the cone in one claw and rotates it like a corn cob.
Those are scales falling there.
Lower mandibles cross either left or right, and each individual always holds the cone in the claw toward which their mandible curves. This ensures that the tip of the mandible is facing the cone, giving the bird the best leverage to quickly pluck the seeds. White-wings are remarkably efficient at harvesting their food. An individual bird can eat up to 3,000 seeds per day. Crossbills are able to swiftly bypass a conifer's armor as a direct result of their specialized beaks, an excellent example of evolutionary adaptation.
So that was a flock I found in Shenango County, east of where I live now. I was at Cornell Lab. I've worked at Cornell Lab of Ornithology 2 different stints. And, I brought the crew out there. We videoed them, and then I put together a narrative, and then we had it put together. And I've showed this piece, and I never get sick of it. But you can see the seed coats falling in some of the footage, and that's what I was experiencing at the lower falls there in Yellowstone in '95. They were just kind of falling down. watching them as they were, basically husking the seed. And now here I am 25, well, actually, what am I saying? 28 years later, I launched this Finch Research Network with a board of directors. I got 4 different professors at universities. I have a professor at Cornell. I have one at Washington State, one at Oregon State, one at UC Davis. And then obviously Tyler Hoare, who is the Finch forecaster, took over for Ron Pittaway a couple of years. He's also on the board of directors. So this thing, and I have somebody in Germany. We do have some traction in across the pond as well. But this was kind of, the first thing that kind of, we wanted to kind of get into was red crossbills. That's where I kind of have made my name over the years of identifying red crossbill call types. People will record them and send them to me. But as far as the Finch Research Network, we want everybody to be part of this thing, whether they're an enthusiast, whether they're a sound recordist, whether just an e-birder and they're uploading their iPhone recordings, or whether they, want to actually donate money to, back one of our research projects. We have 4 different research projects going on right now. One of our main goals is to fund student projects, outdoor projects that will make a difference in crossbill research and conservation. And like I said, we launched this thing with the Finch forecast in 2020, and I could not have predicted a better time to launch it, given that we had a super flight of finches, and it was kind of at the peak of COVID in a lot of ways too. That fall of 2020 was not an easy time for a lot of us. So yeah, a lot of different ways. I have a couple different artists that sell stuff on the website as well. There's a goldfinch, artwork. There's crossbill artwork. There's redpoll artwork as well. So where are we going with all things Finch? Where are we going with the Finch Research Network and the Finch forecast and all things Finch? So wellness, education, research, and conservation. Believe it or not, I know Gene didn't mention it. I actually have led 2 parallel careers, 20 years in conservation, 15 of that at the Lab of O. But I've also, for 11 years, have worked with special needs populations, connecting them to services in the community to keep them in their home. I'm a care manager by day. And I'm a big believer that there's a lot of wellness across the board, whether it's physical or mental health wellness, with observing birds or getting outdoors and observing nature. That's one of the areas. Education, we have a couple different educational programs we're looking to kind of get off the ground, and we have a few different research and conservation programs. So again, wellness, observing nature and engaging with nature and getting outdoors. Again, studies all coming out all the time now about how the mental health benefits and physical health benefits of getting outdoors. There was a study in Exeter University back in 2015 that came out, and now they're coming out all the time. There's paper after paper coming out about the benefits. Canada is now prescribing free passes to their national parks to get outdoors for people, instead of like kind of a pill for depression or something like that. So we need birds in nature for our overall well-being. I think I'm speaking to the choir probably here. This is a photo I took in Chicago a couple of years ago at a friend's house, goldfinch and a redpoll. And when you step back from the eruptive finches, you do have goldfinches and house finches that are actually some of the most common birds at feeders across the country. House finches are an interesting story here in the East. Obviously, the Hollywood finches from the 1940s, they were released in Long Island. I think in New York City, they were released in 1939 or 1940, and that population grew. And, they're one of the most common feeder birds. I know they've declined a fair amount over the years, but they are still in the top 20 on almost every region of the country on Feeder Watch, on Project Feeder Watch. Here's another video. Those are redpolls. in Wisconsin last winter. You know, and so when finches tend to show up, which we don't always see them in big numbers, but when they do, they're kind of like special treats and kind of can get you through the winter. In fact, I was just talking to Ron Pittaway a couple days ago. You know, he was the finch forecaster, put out the winter finch forecast for 20-something years. And we were talking about how the popularity of how finches have grown over the years. And yeah, these are red poles. Pretty amazing. The estimate was about 700 red poles in this yard in Wisconsin 2 years ago. Actually, no, this was last winter. Sorry. Pretty cool. That same yard this year has 300 evening grosbeaks. So numbers up there. I'm gonna move on. So you can see in these, you know, these kind of Project Feeder Watch top 25 list, you know, finches kind of make up, if you think about it, the largest number of individuals and the highest diversity of species on a lot of your top 25 across the country. This was just something I picked from the central region. You can see here, house finch at 6, goldfinch at 8. You got red pole here at 16, purple finch at 17. So they're almost, you know, anywhere in the region across the country, you often have house finch and goldfinch, and then you have these little, you know, these specialty birds that sometimes come down from the north. So the Winter Finch Forecast 2022 forecasting and updates. Origins 1999, although Ron started it before that. It was kind of 1999 was the first year it was on the internet. And then it kind of evolved a little bit in those earlier days. You know, Ron's enthusiasm became infectious. He asked me to do the Crossbill part of that forecast in 2020. And so, you know, these birds, a lot of them, 7 of them, come down from the boreal forest, you know, when we get these years where they erupt. There's a, you know, map of the boreal forest. And there's a map, you know, it's a little hard to see. Those dots are the number of people we actually have giving us reports every year. And that's how we put the forecast together. And we're looking to expand the number of people that are out assessing food crops so we can get even more data to get better at predicting the winter finch forecast. And we have, you know, there's a cluster here in the east, but we have people from coast to coast here. We have people in British Columbia and Alaska, across the boreal, and all the way to Newfoundland. Almost 100 people now are giving us reports. And that's how we put it together. That's how Tyler Orr puts it together, that we put out every year at the end of September. Species that are sampled, here's just a basic list of what we usually ask for people, but they don't need to be like experts of, you know, knowing each one of these species. If you know a few of them, you can contribute. In fact, the Finch Research Network is putting together an iNaturalist project where people will be able to become part of this network, actually. And they can contribute data for us to become hopefully better at predicting these winter finch events. So you can see there is a red spruce with a nice cone crop on it. It's kind of what we ask people to rank, you know, and so an email for the last 20-something years, an email would go out or goes out to people across this network, and they send us their data. And that's how we put this thing together. The issues affected the 2022 seed crop. There was widespread drought across parts of Canada. There's also been a lot of forest fires to the north the last few years. And then there's these insect infestations, spruce budworm outbreaks. So spruce budworm is a caterpillar that basically, it's a natural caterpillar, which is good to note because we often will think of these pests that come in and are, you know, have a negative impact on, you know, trees in our area like the emerald ash borer. But actually, spruce budworm is part of a natural landscape for the past several decades, hundreds of years, where they will infest an area. You know, they can feed on the needles. And if they defoliate the needles enough on fir and spruce from year to year, they can kill the tree. But the interesting thing is those budworm outbreaks become hotspots or baby making factories for evening grosbeaks and purple finches. I think a lot of us come to think of the budworm warblers, Cape May warbler, Tennessee warbler, bay-breasted warbler as really the budworm specialist, but evening grosbeaks, believe it or not, are a budworm specialist as well. What went on this year as far as that it also impacted the Finch forecast this year? There was a really, really great spruce cone crop across the western boreal forest. And that's why there was almost no siskins around this year. There were very, 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 very few siskins. And we predicted that in the forecast. I also believe that probably the redpolls got hung up in that same crop. We thought the redpolls would come in bigger numbers. It was the only one that didn't really go according to plan when we put out the forecast. But I bet you the redpolls got hung up in that spruce crop as well. So eruptions and superflights. So we had a superflight 2 years ago, where we had 8 of the eastern finches, all came down in numbers that we don't typically see. There was even an article in Audubon that they ran that they said siskins had taken over the country. There was just enormous flights of siskins that year. And as Jennifer said, before we got on tonight, there were quite a few redpolls even on Long Island 2 years ago. I talked about the spruce budworm natural cycles and generational cone crops. So what happened that year as a lead-in is we've had a budworm outbreak going on in Ontario and Quebec for about 10 years now, 12 years now. And there was also a generational spruce cone crop that occurred across the eastern boreal a few years ago. And that led to high population levels. So when you have high population levels of these finches to the north, and if the food crop crashes one year, that's what happens. The food won't support that population. And a portion of the population needs to come south. And that's what happened 2 years ago. Now, last winter, we had a good spruce crop in the Adirondacks, actually. And there were quite a few breeding crossbills and siskins last winter. And then this year, we kind of had a solid flight. Some came, some didn't come. We largely hit the forecast except for redpolls. So the cast of characters, purple finches. This is kind of a photo out my back window, actually. Kind of looks like an oil painting. I kind of like it. I was talking to both Gene and Jennifer before I got on tonight that I have had big numbers of purple finches at my house the last 2 years, which is, I've never experienced that actually. And as you can see just in this photo, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think, purple finches. That's a tree sparrow there on the lower right. So for this year, I only did these maps through January because typically through about January is you see the southern terminus of these eruption events. Purple finches have made it all the way down into central Florida this year. And you can see, the darker purples are where their biggest numbers have been. Now, those early numbers were probably, up near our area, the darker purples. Most of those birds were coming through in October and November, and they just kind of blasted through. But they made it all the way to the Atlantic seaboard this year. And there was a gentleman in Bill Hilton who has a banding station in North Carolina. He's been doing banding for 42 years, and it was the fourth or fifth highest number of purple finches he's actually banded. So purple finches do seem to be on the upswing a little bit. Also a budworm specialist. So the numbers do naturally cycle with budworm, purple finch, and evening grosbeak. Pine siskin, again, massive flight 2 years ago. I mean, there were some birds all the way in the south, but look at the light purples there. just not any big numbers compared to a couple years ago. But there are a few birds down in Florida. Siskins are an incredibly adaptive species. They're kind of the generalist of all the finches. They can feed on weed seeds. They can feed on birch catkins like redpolls. They can feed on conifer seed like a crossbill, and they love feeders. So they're pretty adaptive. The redpolls, this is a complex that I won't be surprised if they are lumped. However, the paper that came out about 16 months ago now, saying it was a super gene that was kind of controlling for these plumage differences, and that they weren't really all that different from a DNA perspective, came out in November of 2021. They have not put in a proposal for them to be lumped, surprisingly. So the redpolls, we'll see what happens. I would not be surprised, though, if they end up being lumped at some point. So, yeah, this year, common redpoll, not any big numbers this year in the Northeast. Really wasn't even a big numbers even in the upper Great Lakes. When I was out in Minnesota a couple weeks ago, or about 4 weeks ago now, we saw a handful or two of redpolls. I think as you went a little bit further north of Minnesota, there were more. These were two pictures from last winter in the Adirondacks. There were just really big numbers of both crossbill species. They bred up there last year. White wings, I think a lot of them abandoned the nests, but red crossbills definitely nested in big numbers last year in the Adirondacks. Was not a huge year for crossbills here in the East. However, every 2 years now, you can rely pretty much on this northeastern crossbill that the Finch Research Network just described. And no, we do not plan to necessarily describe any more call types of red crossbills. There's not going to be 25 different call types, but this northeastern bird comes down the coast every year. And I was just talking to Ryan Mandelbaum, and he's like, pretty much every other year I see it now on Long Island and even in New York City. But it wasn't like 2 years ago. There were bigger numbers of both crossbills, particularly red crossbill. So as you can see, though, that's, there's a concentration there. The red dots or the red bubbles are more recent sightings. And you can see there were pretty good numbers that did come down the coast this year of red crossbill as well. The grosbeaks, an evening grosbeak is kind of that beloved bird. A lot of us, I'm not necessarily of the generation that saw evening grosbeaks have feeders in big numbers, even in the city back in the 70s and the 80s. And that was when there was a big budworm outbreak. Pine grosbeak, it was a pretty good eruption. You could see birds in western Massachusetts this year. You could see birds in the southern Adirondacks. There were a few birds in Rochester. But boy, it'd be nice to see some pine grosbeaks make it to Pennsylvania or Long Island. I think it's been, I don't know, it might be 30, 40 years since the last pine grosbeak has been seen on Long Island or in New York City. I'll ask that question at the end, because somebody here on this Zoom tonight might have an answer there for us. Evening grosbeak, though, pretty good numbers again, which this is a new thing again. There were decades there where evening grosbeaks just didn't really even occur into the Carolinas. But there were numbers of them in the Carolinas this year as well. There was one spot in North Carolina had about 40, 50 birds. So that's our cast of characters. Research and conservation. Let me just take a drink of water here. I'm losing my voice a little bit. My allergies have been acting up. So taxonomically, red crossbill, we just described a new call type of red crossbill. I had kind of been on this for better part about 15 years now. I think it's probably a bird that's been around for a long time. It's just its numbers were so low for a while Went through a bottleneck when the forests were cut down here in the East 100 years ago, and now it's rebounding, which is nice to see. And I'm going to show you a nice video here of red crossbill feeding, just to keep everybody awake. This is a Tom Johnson video from Cape May a couple years ago. This is Japanese black pine. Look at that. It's an amazing adaptation. I never get bored of looking at it. So I just want to now, so what I've kind of made my name for many years, I've been a Finch person, like I said, since that moment in the Yellowstone. And then I moved to the Ithaca area, 97, 98. And that was like the biggest, that was an even bigger super flight of finches than what we saw 2 years ago. But people have been sending me recordings of crossbills now for the better part of 20 years, and I've been identifying them on a spectrograph. I just want to show people a couple sounds in a spectrograph, just so you kind of get a little bit of a feel on what it is to kind of listen and watch a signature of a bird's voice on a spectrograph. It's like a signature. So this is Cresta oripendula, though, but it's for effect. So you can see how it descends the sound. But it's kind of fast. Our brain doesn't process sound that well at high speeds. So here it is at half speed. So our brain, you can kind of really follow the descending quality of the sound when you slow it down a little bit. So about 20-something years ago now, there was a scientist in Wyoming that actually asked himself the question, can I find a variety of lodgepole pine east of the Rockies that actually is in an area with the absence of tree squirrels? So if you have tree squirrels drive cone evolution when it comes to crossbills. There's a competition there. If you remove tree squirrels, Dr. Bankman in Wyoming was able to prove that crossbills were co-evolving. A specific call type of crossbill was co-evolving with a local variety of lodgepole pine in an isolated mountain range in Idaho, east of the Rockies. And he studied them, recorded them, banded them, determined basically how they were assortatively mating. So was type 9 red crossbill breeding with other type 9 crossbills, or were they hybridizing with other crossbill call types? Kind of a Galapagos kind of thing going on here, to some degree. It's not, it by no means is it the exact same thing. And he looked at this for 20 years, and it was a different call type, different vocalization. And he found that they were actually 99% of the time assortatively mating with their proper call type, even though type 2s and 5s regularly come into the South Hills in Idaho. And then he was able to show that the morphology of the cones in this isolated mountain range had evolved to have a different morphology of lodgepole pine cones than it was that you could find in lodgepole pine in the Rockies. They had a different morphology. And he described them, listed them, or proposed them as a new species, and they were accepted as a new species about 6-7 years ago. Now, the interesting thing about crossbills is Two summers ago, there was a fire in that mountain range. And what is now known as the Cassia Crossbill for Cassia County, Idaho, those birds have now moved around some. And there are birds actually breeding in Colorado about 500 miles away, 400 miles away. So it'll be interesting to see if the species continues at the species level, or are they lumped back together with the rest of the crossbill call types. But just to give people a feel of the call types we see here in the East mostly. So this is type 1. This is a range map I've put together. It's mostly an Appalachian bird. It's very rare on the coast, which is fascinating to me. And this is what it actually sounds like. And that's the spectrogram of what it looks like. It's a descending call note. Yeah, just one more time here. So very dry, short, and quick, and descending. Now, we described this type 12 red crossbill, and it's something I've been kind of looking at for, like I said, since at least probably about 15 years now. There are recordings of this bird that go back to Maine in the 1960s, early 1960s. But to kind of give you the full picture of this bird, it was originally lumped in a paper describing type 10 red crossbill that was described about 12 years ago. And type 10, the spectrogram is just an upsweep. Pretty different sounding and looking. Now this type 12, now to give you a little bit, so when Ken Irwin described this type 10 in 2010, he listed 34 variants of type 10, which is a little ridiculous. What I think he was doing is he was mainly recording these birds along the Pacific Northwest coast in California and Oregon. He was recording them during the breeding season, and crossbills are known to do the males and the females often will go through a period of call matching, which means they're slightly modifying the sound of their flight call. And so you get these variations on it. Now, this bird in the East, he listed variant 32, 33, and 34, which are the least common of those variants. So he listed them from most common to least common. So when I started looking at this years ago, and I was communicating with Ken, and I had seen some recordings in Maine that seemed to match when I was working at Macaulay Library at the lab, I said, I think this is a different call type. And this is actually what it looks and sounds like. Pretty different. Again, I understand. I've listened to far too many crossbill recordings for any healthy human being. I've listened probably, it's the estimate somewhere around 12 to 15,000 recordings I've listened to at this point. Here's type 12 again. Upsweep with a down sweep. So that's one of the research projects we kind of have been working on for several years. Now we get this type 3 bird that sometimes erupts in very big numbers from the West Coast to the East Coast. And they'll even breed Very small billed bird, loves hemlock and spruce. Again, a very different looking spectrogram. It's a down, up, down. It looks kind of like a zigzag or an N shape. My ears can pick these up pretty well, but I understand this, we're in the weeds here a bit on this. So type 2 is not that common at all in the Northeast, but it is around most years. And it's this, again, down sweep. Very choopy and very low frequency, though. The bird I recorded in central New York, probably about 15 years ago now. So the other thing is a lot of people don't realize there's actually different call types of evening grosbeaks. There's 5 different call types. There might actually even be 6. I'm not going to cover all of them because we only seem to get type 3 in the East here. But I am going to play 2 of them. This is our bird. Very ringing in quality and burry kind of even. And here is type 1, which is the eruptive call type throughout the Western United States. And it's a very different sounding bird to me. Oh, what happened there? Here we go. Yeah, so pure tone whistle really is when I've heard these, when I hear these out west, I always have to pause and go, what the heck is that? Pretty different though. So evening grosbeak has become kind of one of our main, actually it is our main conservation and research project at the Finch Research Network. So a couple of years ago, when we launched this, it was another one of those fortuitous events. We launched the Finch Forecast. David Yaney, who's part of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy, reached out to me and said, hey, this sounds excellent. Finch Research Network, do you want to partner on this wintering grosbeak project that they started in the Allegheny National Forest in Pennsylvania back in 2017? And I said, yes, of course. So I, right out of the gate, when we launched it, I said to the board, we didn't have really any money. We're always, looking to fundraise for these projects, whether they're student projects or whether they're organizational projects. I said, I'm going to send them $1,100 and we're going to buy these nano tags. And we're going to partner with this project to form credibility. And here we are now. 3 years later, 2.5 years later, we've launched an evening grosbeak international road to recovery working group because evening grosbeaks have actually declined 92% since 1970. And there's the decline right there. That's only up to 2018. We've had a little bit of a bounce back the last 2 of the last 3 years. But you can see just a really, really dramatic drop off. And there's only 4 species that are recognized as road to recovery species. And so there was a philanthropist that decided to fund these 4 species. And we have now been traveling to Minnesota, where I ran into Gail and Burke, and we were just in the Allegheny National Forest. And we're heading to the Adirondacks this weekend to do some more tagging and banding of these birds. I don't expect you to read this, but evening grosbeak has one of the most fascinating natural histories of any species in North America. They weren't really common in the Northeast at all until like the late 1800s. And then in the first 30 years of the 1900s, they they followed this baited highway. They, experts or ornithologists at the time believe they followed this baited highway of box elder plantings. They love box elder. And they became more common here in the Northeast. They weren't actually found, I think, on the East Coast until almost 1900. And then they started to breed in the Northeastern states in the 30s and 40s. So it's kind of a fascinating bird. Yes, they became so common during the budworm outbreak, 1965 to 85, that they were actually known as grocery beaks and grosepigs, because they have a voracious appetite for sunflower seed at platform feeders in particular. So we launched this project. It's now a collaborative with 4 different organizations. It's a bit of a dream come true. We're always fundraising for it to try to figure out. We have a working group that meets every other month. And we're actually, have 5 different committees looking at specific topics, trying to get a better handle on it, whether it's diet related and budworm related, or whether it's collision and disease related, or habitat change or climate change related. It's probably a combination of all of those. So 92% decline. As you can see there, I just mentioned kind of these factors that we believe are contributing to the decline. We hope to go out west next year if we get more funding, because we want to actually band and tag birds that are part of these other different call types, because they kind of act as different populations that are unique. And so that's what we've kind of tagged so far. Although we were just in Maine or Minnesota, I need to update this. We're now over 300 color banded birds. We're up to 140 radio tags and about 30 satellite tags. So we have radio tags on these birds, which if they go over MODIS towers, we'll get a reading on location. But we also have satellite tags that are $2,000 a piece that'll give us readings wherever they are, as long as they have enough sunlight to actually power the tag. So it's very innovative, cutting edge, never been done. All the populations seem to be declining across the country. This is kind of, what the process is. This is how we've been banding and tagging birds. Those are bow net traps. Like I said, we just used these in the Allegheny National Forest and also out in Minnesota. That's the crew in Maine last year. That's a bird. So we're trying to get connectivity between the wintering grounds and the breeding grounds. So those are 2 birds that were banded and tagged in Minnesota last year. And you can see one went due north in Ontario. The other one went in Manitoba. We did band some here in central New York as well. And that's been giving us some readings. We banded it in Shenango County, and it's given us some good information. Hopefully we'll get an idea of where it's going on its breeding grounds, hopefully here in the next, 4 to 6 weeks. So education and research, become a winter finch forecaster. And I mentioned this earlier. We've launched this this iNaturalist kind of citizen science project where people can become part of this finch forecast food assessment. And it looks like we're going to be funding a student, hopefully in the Adirondacks this summer. And also I'm working with Scudic Point Research Institute in Acadia National Forest. And it looks like they're going to fund a student to do the same thing, because we want to kind of standardize methods and protocols so people can follow this and become part of the winter finch forecasting network. This is just the beginning stages. This is kind of, if you go in, anybody's an iNaturalist, it's kind of like eBird, but you could put you could put trees, you could put insects, you could put birds in there. And that's why we chose that platform as a way of doing this project. We're also going to look at doing a Crossbill and a Grosbeak foraging project across North America as well. Again, I had this slide earlier. There's two kind of drop downs in this project. And if you went into iNaturalist, you could search for it. We hope to roll this out in the next newsletter that we put out. We're about to put out our second membership newsletter in the Finch Research Network. But in June, we'll put out a third one, which will actually highlight these citizen science projects. The way it works, you walk up, if you're like in an area, a forested area, you see some conifers, you take a picture of the tree to see what kind of cone crop there is. Then you can rank the cone crop. And then if you happen to see a finch foraging, you can actually put what species it is. If it's a crossbill, you can also upload a recording. That'll give us an idea of what call type. We launched a finch feeder cam in Maine. That's actually the feeder cam that you can find at Finch Research Network, YouTube at Finch Research Network. We were basically hosting anywhere from about 50 to 100 evening grosbeaks at this feeder cam in Maine. There's been about 50 to 100 siskins. Today there was a hoary redpoll. There's been pine grosbeaks at this feeder cam, and we're just about to do another feeder cam sometime at the end of the summer, beginning of fall, at Paul Smith's in the Adirondacks as well. It's a collaborative effort with Aspen Song Birdseed. These are some shirts. We just actually released the Rosy Finch project. We're also part of a Rosy Finch project. It might be a species that could end up as a road to recovery bird. It's the highest altitude breeding bird in North America. And southern two species are kind of listed as potentially endangered because of climate change. There's our grosbeak shirt. There's our winter finch forecast shirt. We got a bunch of shirts, and we're just about, stay tuned, we're rolling out a presentation on honey creepers, which a lot of people don't realize they're actually fringillid finches. They evolved one of the most amazing adaptive radiations ever documented on Hawaii. The idea is about 5 million years ago, there was a flock of common rose finches that wandered and landed in Hawaii, and they adaptively radiated to 53 species. Some of these bills don't even look like finch bills anymore. And there's only 17 species left. And so we'll be rolling out a presentation to clubs to try to raise awareness and also some monies to help towards this project that they're trying to save them. It's a very complicated situation over there with a non-native mosquito that's causing avian malaria, and it's killing a lot of the honey creepers. So there's a new shirt we're going to roll out here very soon. Save the Honey Creepers, Finch Research Network. Code 5 Design is the designer on this, who actually is owned by Seabird McKean. He's an evolutionary biologist himself. Some of you might have known, I'm working on a Finches in North America book with Lillian Stokes. We just handed in the manuscript the beginning of March, and we're still working on it. But the pub date, it hopefully will be in pre-ordered by the holiday, but it hopefully will be on bookshelves by April 2nd next year is our pub date. So where are we going? These projects, we want to expand the cone crop reporting roster, increase that to people that want to become the part of the Finch Research Network or the Finch Forecasting Network. We obviously want to increase the diversity of people involved in this project as well. Develop and document an app, which I just showed you a little bit, gave you a little bit of insight on iNaturalist. Increase education to healthy feeding habits and wellness around feeder watching and finches, and obviously increase awareness around finches Hawaii, red crossbill, and evening grosbeak research that I just mentioned to you. Thank you very much. That's all I have. It's Finch Research Network. It's a nonprofit. We launched it, like I said, in September 2020. Can be found at finchnetwork.org and Finch Masters on Facebook, and also Finch's Irruptions and Mass Crops. But thank you very much.
Matt, that was wonderful. Thank you so very much. That's
was great.
fabulous. Great
Yeah.
information.
Sorry, my voice. I work with kids all day, and sometimes my voice just doesn't want to hold out. But thank you for the comment there, Gene. I much appreciated.
It was very, very good. And I've been to Hawaii, so I've seen the creepers, the honey creepers.
Yeah.
They're a special bird.
Yeah, they are. I mean, it's amazing at that. So if Darwin had landed on Hawaii instead of the Galapagos, we'd actually be we'd be studying finches, not tanagers. Galapagos finches are now known as tanagers. So, any questions?
Just something in the middle. You're also doing native orchids like the lady slipper?
Yeah, I do tour. I also have another nonprofit called the Native Orchid Conservation Network. I do tours. I do some guiding for birds and for orchids. In fact, last summer I did a 20 warblers, 20 orchids kind of trip for people that wanted to pay it, as that would pump money back into the nonprofit. So I'm always looking to kind of generate some fundraising. And yeah, orchids are my other specialty. I actually described a new species of orchid about 2 years ago. Spiranthes, one of the little ones.
You must love the Adirondacks because there's so many little orchids up there. You know.
Yeah, no, I do. I love the orchids. There's actually even more orchids right here in central New York, believe it or not.
Huh?
So I while you were talking, I did the pine grosbeaks. No Nassau Suffolk. It's in the chat. Very scattered, old historic sightings, and really no dark purples until you get up into northern Ontario.
Yeah, look at that. Historic listings.
These are ones.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Do you have a program ready to go about the Hawaiian finches now?
I wouldn't say it's ready to go right now because we're kind of going out of season for a little bit, but we're going to actually be rolling this out to any bird clubs and organizations to raise some funds to hopefully help them. Finch Research Network has actually just partnered with the Maui Forest Recovery Project, and we're sending them some money. But you could book us. Me and Nathan Goldberg are the ones that are working on this, and you could book us to do this anytime starting next fall through next winter.
Will you have, good pictures of the birds as well as the information?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jack Jeffrey was like Mr. Photographer. He's the one that's he's been very kind to let us use his photographs for any kind of presentation, and we're also using his photograph. He's a guide over there as well. We're also using his photographs in the Finches of North America book that I'm working on with Lillian.
Excellent.
Yeah.
When are you going to be up in the Adirondacks? You said you were working with Paul Smith, because I go up there. So.
Well, I'm going to be up there this weekend. I'm going to hopefully hook up with Brian McAllister at Paul Smith's, and I also going to hook up with Sue Wilson at St. Lawrence, and also I'm hooking up with Joan Collins. I know probably, excuse me, a lot of you know Joan. Yes. I'm good friends with Joan as well.
Okay. All right.
And I should say, I don't know if everybody remembers Ned Brinkley at all. We actually created a Ned Brinkley Research, Finch Research Fund that you can also give money to, that will go directly to any kind of student working on finches. Ned is no longer with us. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was instrumental in a lot of us getting our careers off the ground. He was editor of North American Birds, ABA's North American Birds, for a better part of 20 years. So anyway, I just figured I'd put that out there as well. But I'll be up there this weekend for 3 days. I believe we'll be tagging and banding at a couple locations up there. So,
excellent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jen, do we have any other questions for Matt here?
Not in the chat, but if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question, go ahead. You're all muted, so if you want to ask a question, you got to click that microphone button.
I can do a stop share too. We can see each other a little bit here. If anybody wants to ask. Anybody any questions out there?
Well, Matt, not a question, but great talk. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Nicely done.
And I also like that the spec. Well, hold on, I have it down here. The we're recording the sounds. That's a spectrum. It's a
Spectrograph.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Macaulay Library, while I was working there, so the most common bird in the Macaulay Library at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology for recordings is red crossbill by about 30%. There's 17,000 recordings of red crossbills in that collection.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's probably your fault.
It is. It is my fault. Totally is.
Hear from you again when you maybe have the program together for the Hawaiian finches. That would be great.
Yeah.
Cycle back. Please do cycle back, because it's going to be a great presentation, and we'll give the backstory a little bit more on what's going on. It's there's a lot of different partners right now trying to save these last 17 species. American Bird Conservancy. There's a Maui and Kauai Forest Recovery Project. Dr. Hart at the University of Hawaii. Ourselves. There's also Fish and Wildlife. It's something needs to be done, and if nothing gets done here soon, we're going to lose even some more. The problem is also climate change. The mosquitoes, which are not native there, are going further up the mountain, and these birds actually have never evolved any defenses. So and there's other things that have happened historically as well that has contributed to the decline, but just an amazing adaptive radiation of species. That Evie, which is the bird I showed there with the long bill, that bird uses that bill kind of for nectaring, and it's actually a fringillid finch. So that bird adapted and kind of figured out a way to survive, over time. But just again, a fascinating story there.
Well, Matt, thank you again. This was great. I appreciate your work. And you're from upstate New York. That's where you are now?
Yeah, I'm in Cortland, so I'm between Syracuse and Ithaca.
My alma mater.
What was that? Your alma mater?
Yeah.
Nice. Absolutely. Yeah, I still teach 2 classes there. I teach 2 one credit classes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So.
All right.
Yep.
Anything from anybody else for him? Any questions?
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to say good night. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for hosting us, everybody. Have a good night.